Your Jeep transmission could already be wearing itself out every single day, and most owners have no idea they're the ones causing it. One setting quietly overheats the fluid. Another doubles internal wear every commute. And the worst part? Jeep actually enables some of these from the factory. Today, we're exposing the transmission settings and habits that can turn a perfectly good Jeep into a $5,000 rebuild. Let's start at number 10, the lifetime fluid myth. Stellantis prints lifetime fluid in your owner's manual, but the transmission inside most modern Jeeps isn't theirs. It's the ZF-8HP family, designed in Friedrichshafen, Germany, and ZF themselves publish a very different recommendation. Their service bulletin calls for an oil change at 80,000 to 120,000 kilometers, which works out to roughly 50,000 to 75,000 miles, or 8 years, whichever comes first. The shorter end of that range covers severe service, which includes towing, off-road use, and high ambient temperatures. So why does Stellantis say lifetime? Because the powertrain warranty on most Jeeps runs 5 years or 60,000 miles. Once you clear that bumper, lifetime simply means lifetime of the warranty period and nothing more. The Wrangler JL with the 3.6 Pentastar uses the 850RE, which is the Chrysler-built version of the ZF-8HP50. The EcoDiesel, the Rubicon 392, and the high-torque Grand Cherokees use the 8HP75. They all run the same fluid sold under Mopar part number 68218925AB, which is rebadged ZF Lifeguard Fluid 9, not Lifeguard 8 as some YouTube videos still claim. Skip the service and the friction modifiers shear, the additives oxidize, and the aluminum valve body bores start losing dimension. Sonax sells oversized pressure regulator kits and the ZF 8-Zip kit because that aluminum bore wear is the most common 8-horsepower failure mode on the planet. A pan drop with fresh fluid runs around $350 in parts and DIY time. A valve body service runs $800 to $1,500 at a specialist shop. A full rebuild runs $3,500 to $5,000. Therefore, do the fluid before 60,000 miles and save thousands. The next setting hammers different parts entirely, and that drops us into number 9, auto start-stop. AAA tested 3 vehicles back in 2014 and found auto start-stop delivered 5 to 7% fuel savings on the EPA urban cycle. However, that benefit comes with a hidden tax. A 2023 SAE study published through the Department of Energy showed savings between 7.27% on the federal test cycle and 26.4% on the New York City cycle, depending on traffic density. So the system works in stop and go, but every time the engine cuts off and fires back up, the starter motor takes a hit. Jeeps with ESS use a heavy-duty starter that costs $400 to $600 to replace and an AGM battery that runs $200 to $400. Those AGM batteries typically last 3 to 5 years in start-stop service versus 7 to 10 in a non-ESS vehicle. Now on the transmission side, ZF actually engineered around the obvious problem. The 8HP includes a hydraulic impulse storage accumulator, called HIS, which is a spring-loaded piston that holds roughly 100 centiliters of pressurized oil. When the engine stops, the HIS keeps your shift elements supplied, so the gearbox is ready to drive in 350 milliseconds instead of 800. That part of the design is genuinely clever. However, the rest of your driveline doesn't get the same protection. Engine mounts, the timing chain, accessory belts, and the high-pressure fuel pump all see thousands of extra cycles every year of ownership. If you hate the feature, your 3 options are pressing the ESS off button at every key cycle, installing a $100 plug-in module like the Auto Stop Eliminator, or letting it run and budgeting for an earlier battery and starter. The next setting wears the same valve body in a different way. Sliding down to number 8, the Eco Mode Trap. Eco Mode sounds like free fuel economy, but in stop-and-go traffic, it's a slow transmission killer. When you flip Eco on, the TCM raises shift points, so the transmission grabs the next gear sooner, locks the torque converter clutch earlier, and runs at lower RPMs whenever possible. On the highway, that's helpful and pays back at the pump. In bumper-to-bumper traffic, however, it forces the torque converter clutch to slip repeatedly at low speeds because the engine is begging for torque the trans won't quite give it. That slippage generates heat the cooler can't dump fast enough. A TF lives happiest between 175 and 200 degrees Fahrenheit. At 220 degrees, fluid life is cut roughly in half. At 250, it drops by about 75%. At 300, you're measuring fluid life in hundreds of miles, not tens of thousands. Eco mode in city traffic regularly pushes converter temps into the 230 to 240 range, and the average Jeep owner has no transmission temperature gauge on the dash to warn them before damage starts. So when should you actually run eco? Highway cruising, light loads, flat terrain. When should you turn it off? Traffic jams, stop-and-go errands, anything with a trailer, and any long climb where the converter is working hard. The smart move on a Wrangler, Gladiator, Grand Cherokee, Cherokee, Renegade, or Compass is to leave eco off in town and switch it on once you're rolling steady. You're not giving up much fuel economy in city driving anyway. However, the trans wear difference over 100,000 miles is enormous. Eco kills slowly. The next mode kills fast. That brings us to number 7, Sport Mode. Sport Mode looks like fun on the menu, but using it every day is one of the fastest ways to shorten valve body life on a ZF8HP. When Sport is active, the TCM holds gears longer, downshifts under braking, sharpens throttle response, and roughly doubles the number of shift events in normal driving. ATRA and Sonax engineers document shift fill times of plus or minus 120 milliseconds and pressure tolerances of plus or minus 350 millibars on a healthy 8 horsepower. Every single shift is a small hydraulic pulse that wears the aluminum bores in the valve body just a little. Multiply those pulses by 2 for daily sport driving, and you accelerate the same wear pattern that drives Sonax to sell oversized pressure regulator valve kits, TC pressure valve kits, and the ZF8-Zip drop-in fix. The most common failure on these transmissions isn't a burnt clutch pack. It's a worn valve body that loses line pressure and then burns a clutch pack as a secondary effect months later. That valve body repair runs $800 to $1,500 at a specialist shop. However, a worst-case rebuild after collateral damage runs $3,500 to $5,000. The fix is brain-dead simple. Use Sport for an on-ramp, a pass, a back road, a moment that asks for it. Don't sit in Sport on your morning commute or grocery run. Drive mode does the same job for 99% of normal traffic, and your trans will quietly extend its own service life by tens of thousands of miles. If you own a Grand Cherokee SRT, Trackhawk, or 392, the same rule matters more. The next habit confuses the brain of the transmission entirely, and that drops us into number 6, adaptive learning. Modern Jeeps run a transmission control module that learns your driving. Over the first few thousand miles of ownership, the TCM measures shift fill times in milliseconds and clutch apply pressures in millibars, then adjusts its tables to match your specific torque converter, your clutch packs, and your driving style. ATRA and Sonax confirm those tolerances run to plus or minus 120 milliseconds and plus or minus 350 millibars on a properly functioning 8 horsepower. That adaptive table is exactly what gives your Jeep its smooth shifts after break-in. Switching constantly between auto, sport, snow, sand, rock, mud, and eco can confuse that learning process. Some YouTubers call it adaptive learning contamination. However, the proper engineering term is just degraded adaptation. The TCM ends up averaging across modes that demand wildly different shift behavior, so shifts get sloppy, flares creep in, and the converter clutch starts cycling at the wrong moments. None of that destroys the transmission overnight, but it accelerates valve body wear because the hydraulics are being commanded into the wrong pressure window over and over again. The practical fix is to pick a default mode and stay in it. Use the specialty modes only when conditions truly demand them. After a battery disconnect or a major service, give the trans 50 to 100 miles in mixed driving to relearn shift points before you judge shift quality. If you want to peek under the hood, a 4SCAN compatible OBD adapter costs $60 to $140 and lets you watch shift adaptation values live on a Wrangler, Grand Cherokee, or Cherokee. That tool alone has saved a lot of misdiagnoses. The next habit doesn't just wear the trans, it can break parts the same day. Sliding down to number 5, the drive to reverse shift. Shifting from drive to reverse, or reverse to drive, before the wheels stop rolling, is a habit Jeep owners pick up in parking lots without thinking about what's happening underneath. On a Wrangler JL with the 850RE, a Grand Cherokee WL, or a Renegade with the 9HP48, that quick rocker shift sends the parking pawl, the clutch packs, and the engine mounts into a load they were never designed to absorb. The transmission tries to engage reverse rotation, while the planetary gear set is still spinning forward, so the clutches slam, the mounts twist, and the pawl gets a chip taken out of its tooth. It gets uglier on the older Jeeps. The WK Grand Cherokee, the Commander, the JK Wrangler, and the LX platform Chrysler 300 used the Mercedes 722.6, also known as the W5A580, or the NAG1. That 5-speed has a well-documented conductor plate problem, and any rough rocker shift can push the failure timeline forward by years. A genuine Mopar conductor plate runs $150 to $200 from online sellers. However, the dealer counter price is $600 to $800 for the same part. Labor and fluid on top easily doubles the bill. The fix is the easiest on the whole list. Stop completely, foot on the brake, then move the shifter. 1 full second pause before you release the brake pedal, every time. On modern 8 and 9-speed Jeeps, you're protecting the parking pawl and the input shaft from impact damage. On the older NAG1 Jeeps, you're protecting the conductor plate. The next habit is safer in folklore than in reality. Before the next one, if you want your Jeep to last hundreds of thousands of miles without draining your wallet on repairs, check out my ebook, The 500,000-Mile Jeep Blueprint. It covers the maintenance habits and ownership tricks most Jeep owners never learn until it's too late. Link is down in the description below. That pushes us into number 4, the coasting in neutral habit. Coasting in neutral is one of the oldest myths in driving. Old-timers swear it saves gas, mechanics yell back that you'll starve the trans of lube, and both sides are partially wrong on a modern ZF 8HP. The lubrication myth dates back to the carbureted era, when transmissions ran their pumps off the output shaft. The 8 horsepower runs a chain-driven vane pump that's tied directly to the torque converter hub. As long as the engine is turning at idle or above, that pump is circulating fluid, so neutral does not starve the trans of oil whatsoever. The real reasons to stay in drive are fuel economy and clutch wear. Modern Jeeps with the 3.6 Pentastar, 5.7 Hemi, or 6.4 use deceleration fuel cutoff, called DFCO. Coasting downhill in gear with your foot off the throttle burns literal zero fuel because the injectors are commanded shut while the wheels spin the engine. Shift to neutral and the engine drops to idle, which actually burns a small amount of gas to keep itself running at 700 revolutions per minute. That's the exact opposite of what your grandfather told you back in the carb days. There's also a clutch pack concern worth knowing. When you slide back into drive at 30 or 40 miles per hour, the transmission has to re-engage the appropriate clutch pack while the input and output shafts are at very different speeds. That apply event is harder than a normal upshift. Add the safety factor, which is zero throttle response in neutral if you need to dodge something, and there's no upside left to it. The next habit takes a different gearbox entirely and breaks it in seconds. Rolling into number 3, the 4-low mistake. Forcing the transfer case into 4-low at the wrong speed is one of those mistakes that sounds harmless and absolutely isn't. On a standard Wrangler or Gladiator with the NV231 command track, the low-range planetary set gives you a 2.72-to-1 reduction. On a Rubicon with the NV241OR rock track, it's a 4.0-to-1 reduction, one of the deepest factory crawl ratios you can buy on a new vehicle today. Both transfer cases need the same shift procedure, and the owner's manual is specific about it. You roll the Jeep at 2 to 3 miles per hour, put the transmission in neutral, then move the transfer case lever or twist the rotary dial over to 4LO. Try to slam it in at 15, 20, or 30 miles per hour, and the synchros, the shift fork, and the chain take all the impact at once. Bent forks bend further, chains stretch. In the worst case, you crack the case half itself, which ends the transfer case as a unit. Replacement is brutal. A used or remanufactured transfer case installed runs $2,500 to $4,000 depending on the model and your GPON labor rate. A chain replacement alone runs around $1,500 with the labor included. Compare that to 10 seconds of patience at a trailhead. For 4-high on a part-time transfer case, the manual technically allows shift on the fly up to about 55 miles per hour. However, staying under 45 is safer and easier on the chain. SelecTrack, QuadraTrack 1, and QuadraTrack 2 have center differentials, so they handle dry road duty differently. The next mistake breaks the same case another way. That drops us to number 2, 4-wheel drive on dry pavement. Running part-time 4WD on dry pavement is the single most common transfer case killer on Wranglers, older XJ and KJ Cherokees, and Gladiators. The reason is pure geometry. When you corner, the front wheels travel a longer arc than the rear wheels, which means they need to turn at a slightly higher speed through the turn. A center differential, like the one inside SelecTrack, QuadraTrack 1, QuadraTrack 2, or the WL Grand Cherokee, exists exactly to allow that speed difference between axles. Those full-time systems are fine on dry pavement, and Jeep markets them that way on purpose. A part-time transfer case, like the NV231 Command Track or the NV241OR Rock Track, has no center differential at all. When you lock it into 4-high on dry asphalt, the front and rear drive shafts are forced to spin at exactly the same speed. The geometry says they can't, so the driveline binds up. You feel it as a shudder in tight turns, sometimes called crow hopping. What you don't feel is the load building inside the case, the front axle, and the rear axle. That bind wears the chain, the planetary gears, and the input shaft of the transfer case fast. It can also pop U-joints and damage the front axle disconnect on some models. Jeep's own 4x4 FAQ on Jeep.com lists this as a hard no on dry pavement, in writing. The fix is simple. Use 2-high on dry roads. Use 4-high part-time only on snow, mud, sand, gravel, or ice. If your Jeep has a full-time setting, that's your dry pavement option. The final habit cooks transmissions faster than any other. And finally, at number 1, towing in normal mode. Towing in regular drive without engaging proper tow logic is what destroys more Jeep transmissions than every other item on this list combined. The owner's manual for the Grand Cherokee WL and WK2 describes tow/haul mode as a setting that delays upshifts, downshifts under braking for engine braking, locks the torque converter clutch earlier, and pulls fluid temperatures down measurably. Towing without it pushes converter temps past 250 degrees Fahrenheit on any long grade or hot day. Fluid life drops by roughly 75% at that temperature. Add a few thousand miles of abuse, and the rebuild bill is $3,500 to $5,000. The part most Wrangler JL and Gladiator JT owners don't realize is this. The JL and JT do not have a tow/haul button at all. Pages 369 and 370 of the JL Owner's Manual describe a load adaptive shift logic that monitors torque demand and adjusts shift behavior when a trailer is detected. It works reasonably well. However, with a heavier trailer, many owners use electronic range select, called ERS, to cap the top gear at 5 or 6, which mimics a traditional tow/haul button. For Grand Cherokee owners with the actual button, press it every time you hook up a trailer, even an empty utility trailer. For JL and JT owners, drop the gear cap manually, watch your transmission temperature on the EVIC display, and pull over if it climbs past 230. If you tow more than a few times a year, change the fluid every 30,000 to 50,000 miles, not at Stellantis lifetime intervals. A $350 fluid service beats a $5,000 rebuild every single time. If this video helps save your Jeep transmission, subscribe for more hidden Jeep problems, maintenance tips, and ownership secrets most people never learn. And before you go, which of these habits do you think destroys the most Jeeps? Let me know in the comments, and click the video on screen for another Jeep trick most owners still don't know. See you there.